This story begins in a small city in South Korea, Daegu to be precise, in a high school that had its own superstar. Her name is Kang Joo-eun. Not only was she brilliant in academics, but she was also drop-dead gorgeous. Forget just the school, every guy in the entire city had a crush on her. She was so popular that people called her Daegu's Venus. But of course, where there's beauty and admiration, there's also jealousy. The girls in school weren't exactly her biggest fans and would rather sulk in a corner than admit she was the queen of attention. Now, in the same school, there was another star, Im Woo-shik, a rising swimming prodigy and, of course, incredibly handsome. If Joo-eun had guys swooning over her, Woo-shik had girls practically fainting at the sight of him. It was a match made in high school heaven. One day, Woo-shik summoned Joo-eun to the rooftop and confessed his feelings. Lucky for him, because Joo-eun had been waiting for this moment, so she said yes. And just like that, they became the school's ultimate power couple. With her studies on track and a loyal boyfriend by her side, Joo-eun was convinced that her life was officially set. Fast forward a few years, through sheer hard work, Joo-eun finally became a lawyer, but in the process, she had completely neglected her body, leading to a rather fluffier version of herself. But it does not change her personality. She was still as cheerful and kind as ever, and his boyfriend Woo-shik is still with her from the past 15 years. Joo-eun had been waiting for the moment he'd propose, but that dream never turned into reality. If she thought becoming a lawyer would set her life, reality had other plans. Work stress was through the roof, and her seniors at the office weren't exactly her biggest cheerleaders, and worst of all, her weight kept increasing, no matter how much she tried to lose it. The problem is that no one was there to motivate her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in the USA, a man named Kim Young-ho was busy flexing his perfect physique. A fitness-obsessed trainer who had spent most of his life either in a gym or working out, Young-ho was the go-to physiotherapist for Hollywood celebrities and athletes. In America, people knew him as John Kim, and while Joo-eun was struggling with weight loss, he was out there making sure others had the perfect body. Two people and two different worlds. But fate had a funny way of bringing people together. Right now, Young-ho is in deep trouble. The media is buzzing with scandalous headlines linking him to a well-known celebrity who was caught with a suspicious white substance. Rumors are flying that John Kim is involved too because they're dating. But here's the catch, that nobody actually knows what John Kim looks like. Young-ho has always avoided the public eye, so people are just running wild with their assumptions. Meanwhile, back in Korea, Woo-shik has invited Joo-eun for a fancy dinner. And not just any dinner, but this happens to be the anniversary of the day he first proposed to her in high school. Naturally, Joo-eun is convinced that tonight's the night he's finally going to pop the big question. When she arrives at the restaurant, her suspicions are confirmed because Woo-shik has gone all out. Beautiful decor, romantic flowers, and an elegant setup that screams proposal time. After dinner, he even offers to drop her home, and just as they reach her place, he hands her a small ring box. Joo-eun's heart soars. Finally! She's been waiting for this moment for years. But when she opens the box, her world comes crashing down. Inside isn't a brand new engagement ring, it's the same old ring from their high school days. And before she can even process it, Woo-shik drops the bomb that he wants to break up. Joo-eun is devastated. Furious, she throws the flowers back at him and storms off, tears streaming down her face. If he was going to break up, what was the point of this whole grand dinner? The very next day, Joo-eun has a business trip to the USA. Without wasting any time, she boards her flight, hoping work will distract her from her heartbreak. Meanwhile, in America, Young-ho is living with his friend Jang Jun-sung, who is not just a buddy, but also his client. Jun-sung is a famous UFC fighter, nicknamed the Korean Snake, and he's been trying to convince Young-ho to return to Korea. But with the scandal hanging over his head, Young-ho is reluctant. This doesn't sit well with Jun-sung, but his easygoing manager, Kim Ji-woon, couldn't care less. Ji-woon is the kind of guy who lives in his own little world, oblivious to chaos and just vibing through life. Despite everything, Young-ho actually wants to return to Korea. The only problem is that he needs to do it without the media or his powerful family noticing. Coming from an ultra-rich family, he was expected to take over the family business, but instead, he chose to be a physiotherapist. His decision didn't sit well with his family, and now he's practically in hiding. Eventually, after his match, Jun-sung decides to fly back to Korea. Coincidentally, Joo-eun is on the same flight. While boarding, she crosses paths with Ji-woon, who is sitting in economy class because Jun-sung gave up his business class seat to help a pregnant woman. Suddenly, mid-flight, an emergency announcement is made that a passenger needs urgent medical attention. To everyone's surprise, Young-ho steps forward and Jun Sung is stunned. He thinks that Young-ho, on a plane to Korea by choice? That was the last thing he expected. And the patient was none other than Ju-eun. She had passed out, and when the flight attendants tried to lift her, it took 3 people to move her. Eventually, they carry her to business class, where Young-ho immediately gets to work. As he examines her, he unfastens her blazer and discovers the problem, that she's been wearing a ridiculously tight shapewear belt. This belt squeezes her stomach to an unhealthy degree. No wonder she fainted. He quickly relieves the pressure, bringing her back to consciousness. When Ju-eun finally wakes up, she finds her clothes ripped. Before she can even process the situation, her eyes land on Young-ho, and then she does something completely unexpected. Without a second thought, she places her hand on his thigh and gives his muscle a little squeeze. When Ju-eun realizes how Young-ho saved her, she feels utterly embarrassed, because she knows exactly how she had tangled herself up. Young-ho jokes that she's the first girl who made him take off her clothes within just 5 minutes of meeting. Ju-eun awkwardly thanks him, but Young-ho, instead of brushing it off, tells her that in return, she'll have to help him with something. As soon as the plane lands, Young-ho tricks the airport medical team by introducing himself as Ju-eun's family member and sneaks into the ambulance with her and slips away, because his actual family is waiting outside. While Ju-eun gets treated, Young-ho calmly orders a car for himself. When he's about to leave, he spots Ju-eun standing outside the hospital waiting for a taxi. She was on her way to meet Woo-shik, who had asked her to come. Ju-eun assumed they would get back together. After all, they had broken up and patched things up several times in the last 15 years. Seeing her waiting, Young-ho offers her a ride, and she accepts. Once they reach Woo-shik's place, she thanks Young-ho and walks off, believing this will be their last meeting. With excitement in her heart, she heads toward Woo-shik, only to freeze in place when she sees him. Woo-shik was smiling and completely caught up in a romantic moment with another woman. The sight crushes her, and she turns away, tears streaming down her face as she runs off in the rain. But then, she senses someone following her. Terrified, she quickens her pace, only to realize that the person tailing her is none other than Young-ho. He had come to return her bandage and had witnessed everything. Trying to comfort her, he tells her that she could go back and fight Woo-shik, but there's no point, because the truth is, she's no longer in his heart. Also, standing in the rain like this will only give her a cold. He offers to drop her home, but Ju-eun insists she's strong enough to go alone. Instead, she grabs Young-ho's umbrella and walks away. After she leaves, Young-ho finds himself thinking about her as how heartbroken she must be. Instead of going home, he drives around the city, lost in thought, until he finally decides to stay at a hotel, because he didn't want to go home. His mind drifted back to childhood memories of how, when he was injured as a child, only his grandmother had come to drop him off at the airport, leaving him to travel alone in pain. Back in the present, when Young-ho wakes up, he finds his family manager and bodyguard standing right there. He sighs because, of course, his family's reach extends everywhere. Making excuses, he claims he can't go home because he has nothing decent to wear, but his manager, being 10 steps ahead, has already prepared clothes for him. Oh, and not just that, he's also arranged flowers and gifts for Young-ho to present to his family. With no escape, Young-ho is forced to go with them. Meanwhile, Ju-eun sneaks into a meeting, only to find out that the new vice president is being introduced today. To her shock, the new vice president is none other than her university senior and former best friend, Oh Soo-jin. But back in their university days, the roles were reversed. Soo-jin was chubby, while Ju-eun was the campus Cinderella, always stepping in to protect Soo-jin from bullies who mocked her weight. Thinking their friendship is still intact, Ju-eun warmly greets her. But to her disappointment, Soo-jin now mocks Ju-eun's weight and dreams, leaving even their colleagues uncomfortable with the exchange. On the other hand, when Young-ho arrives at a location to meet his grandmother, he spots a pair of high heels outside and immediately realizes what's going on. Turns out his bodyguard has secretly arranged a blind date for him. Despite his reluctance, Young-ho is forced to stay at least until his manager and bodyguard get distracted. The moment they let their guard down, his friend Jun-sung and Jun-sung's manager swoop in to rescue him. They whisk him away, and the trio goes on a shopping spree. Meanwhile, Young-ho is also trying to unlock Ju-eun's phone, which he accidentally left with him. Right then, a number pops up on the screen, because she's calling on her phone from another one. The moment Young-ho answers, she demands her phone back. Young-ho playfully tells her to meet him at a certain location and, just to tease her further, adds that since her slimming belt tore because of him the other day, he'll buy her a new one since he's already shopping. Ju-eun, already humiliated by how her life keeps getting ruined by a stranger, cringes even harder. When they finally step out of the store, Young-ho's manager is waiting for him, and he is holding up that scandalous photo. He informs Young-ho that his grandmother is absolutely furious and doesn't want to see him at the moment. However, that doesn't mean she's disowning him. Cut to Young-ho's grandmother, the powerful chairwoman of a massive company. During a board meeting, she announces that in just a few days, her grandson will take over the company. Naturally, this doesn't sit well with certain board members who are eyeing her empire. One of them, a man named Jeong, outright opposes the decision. However, Grandma isn't the type to tolerate nonsense. So she immediately dismisses him. Furious, Jeong returns to his office and orders one of his employees to dig up information on the chairman's mysterious grandson, whom no one has ever seen before. And that employee was none other than Woo Shik, who, coincidentally, has no idea who Young-ho is either. Later that night, Ju-eun arrives at the location Young-ho mentioned, but instead of finding Young-ho, she spots Woo Shik. And then, horror strikes, and standing next to him, looking cozy and suspiciously close, is her best friend, Soo-jin. In an instant, the realization hits her like a truck. Her boyfriend and her so-called best friend have been deceiving her together. Unable to handle the betrayal, Ju-eun turns to leave, only for fate to make things worse. She trips over the door and crashes onto the ground, her shoes flying off in different directions. Right in front of an entire hotel, she has become a full-blown spectacle. Lying there utterly mortified, she has only one prayer in her heart. Someone, anyone, please, just get me out of here. Just then, our hero, Young-ho, shows up. He gently helps Ju-eun put her shoes back on, and with a tender touch, starts fixing her hair like he's her boyfriend. Watching this unfold, Woo Shik gets jealous and tries to approach Ju-eun. However, Young-ho stops him right in his tracks, telling him that Ju-eun clearly doesn't want to talk to him. He then walks her to his suite, where he softly tells her that he knows she's in pain and he's going to help ease it. At first, Ju-eun thinks he's talking about the emotional pain in her heart, but Young-ho is more literal than that. He touches her shoulder, gently explaining that it's dislocated, and guides her to sit on the bed. He offers to help with some exercises, but jokingly warns her to stay quiet, or people might think they're doing something else. As he starts to work on her shoulder, Ju-eun can't help but make a sound. This causes some bystanders to get the wrong idea. After fixing her shoulder, Young-ho gives her jacket and asks if she needs any more help. Ju-eun thanks him, telling him that even though they're strangers, he's been incredibly kind and helpful. She doesn't need anything more from him. Later, when she's downstairs, Woo Shik sits beside her and starts offering her drinks like wine, juice, everything. He even says she can throw it all at him if she wants. But Ju-eun, unfazed, calmly responds that she's sitting there because she's a well-mannered and educated person. She goes on to call Woo Shik not only a jerk but also a cheater. Finally, she told him in clear words that she no longer wants anything to do with him. At home, Ju-eun tosses away all the memories of her time with Woo Shik, throwing them in the trash bin, and she can't hold back her tears. The next day, she visits Soo-jin's office and demands to know why she did what she did. Soo-jin, without hesitation, tells her to come along for a private chat. Once they're alone, Soo-jin opens up about her university days, revealing how no guy ever liked her, and all of her crushes ended up liking Ju-eun instead. Hearing this, Ju-eun finally understands that Soo-jin was never really her friend, but she was always jealous of her. Soo-jin's actions, including getting close to Woo Shik, were all driven by resentment, and it's clear now that Soo-jin has no regrets about any of it. Finally, after being betrayed by both Woo Shik and her best friend, Ju-eun returns home to find a parcel from the airport. Inside is a coat, along with an identity card that reads John Kim. Seeing the identity card, Ji-eun begins to think about her flight and recalls that Kim Ji-woong was sitting next to her. She wonders if he's actually Kim John, because his last name was also Kim. Driven by this assumption, she storms up to Ji-woong and starts blackmailing him, and she threatens to expose that he's Kim John if he doesn't help her. Just as things are escalating, Young-ho steps in and calms her down, asking what exactly she wants. Ju-eun, with a smug look, responds that she wants the kind of transformation that Hollywood stars undergo, and she's convinced that John Kim is the one who can make it happen. The three of them sit down to discuss this while Ju-eun thinks she's intimidated them with her threat. She believes they'll help her with her transformation, and then she later can teach Soo-jin a lesson. But the three guys are bewildered by how confidently she's holding on to this misunderstanding. However, they're not willing to take risks. If Ji-woong's true identity comes out, the news will inevitably reach Young-ho, and no one would take Ji-woong seriously as a physiotherapist with his thin frame. So, they come up with a plan. Ji-woong, pretending to be Kim-jon, will give Ju-eun an intense training session so extreme that she'll run away. They agree to her terms, and once Ju-eun hears that they've accepted, she becomes ecstatic. She goes home and enjoys her favorite meal, knowing that the next day, her transformation will begin. The following day, Young-ho is preparing to meet his father, though he doesn't seem very excited. His relationship with his father has always been tense. He visits his father's office, but they barely speak to each other. Young-ho ends up saying sorry and mentions that he'll make another appointment for a proper meeting. Meanwhile, Ju-eun arrives for her training session, calling Ji-woong Kim-jon. Whenever Young-ho tries to give her proper training, she hushes him by saying that he doesn't know anything about it. The three of them, Young-ho, Ji-woong, and his friend, continue to push Ju-eun through intense training, leaving her exhausted. Despite the grueling sessions, Ju-eun goes for a jog the next day, determined to continue. This goes on for a few days until one day, when Young-ho is at the gym alone. He demonstrates some exercises and casually mentions he's going on a blind date. However, he ditches the blind date and ends up eating alone at a restaurant, where he runs into Woo-shik, who's there to meet Ju-eun's mother. When Ju-eun finds out, she immediately heads to the restaurant as well. Her mother starts talking about marriage, but Ju-eun cuts her off, and she says that they had a breakup and doesn't want to discuss it. After Woo-shik leaves, Ju-eun's mother scolds her, implying that her actions are the reason for the breakup. She also criticizes her weight, saying no one will like her because of her behavior, her old age, and her weight, which Young-ho overhears. He feels bad for Ju-eun and her situation. The next day, Soo-jin adds to Ju-eun's misery by telling her she has to appear on TV for a case. Ju-eun reluctantly agrees. During the show, Ju-eun impresses everyone, including Young-ho, with her intelligence, but in the middle of the interview, she suddenly faints and collapses. She is rushed to the hospital, and Young-ho is also worried, so he immediately heads there to check on her. When Soo-jin hears about Ju-eun's condition, she's upset to find out that Woo-shik too rushed to the hospital, clearly concerned about Ju-eun. At the hospital, when Ju-eun regains consciousness and sees herself in that state, Young-ho reassures her by telling her that this time, her clothes haven't torn. He offers to drop her home. Ju-eun, confused by Young-ho's concern, thanks him, but he then asks her why she wants to lose weight, when Ju-eun remains silent and she is about to leave. But Young-ho grabs her and says that if she wants to lose weight, she needs to do it properly. He then reveals that he is, in fact, John Kim, and explains that the training she's been doing won't help her lose weight. He also shares that when the doctors ran tests, they discovered a hormone imbalance and thyroid issues, so she needs to take a different approach to reach her goal. The flashback revealed that while Ju-eun was unconscious, Woo-shik had shown up and he'd decided to interrogate Young-ho. He'd apparently asked, "What's your relationship with her?" To which Young-ho had replied that he had no right to ask such questions. He told him to simply consider him the girl's guardian, the kind who magically appears whenever danger strikes. Little did they know, Soo-jin had been sneaking around in the background, witnessing this entire dramatic exchange. She didn't really like it because despite the breakup, she can see that Woo-shik still cares for her. Back to the present, the next day, Ju-eun walked into the office and instantly realized her life had turned into a live comedy show. Apparently, her fainting episode had been caught on camera and was now making rounds as viral memes. To make matters worse, the internet had labeled her the falling big girl, turning her into everyone's favorite laughingstock. Needless to say, she felt completely humiliated. But just when she thought the day couldn't get worse, Jun-sung and Ji-woong showed up with their best "we're sorry" faces. They admitted that they had been keeping secrets from her. The big reveal was that Kim-jon was apparently Young-ho. They begged her to forgive them and, with dramatic flair, asked her to be their friend again. After some sulking, Ju-eun forgave them. Later, she went to meet Young-ho, who, being the control freak that he was, suggested that if she really wanted to change herself, she should hand over her body to him. He promised to take charge of her diet, training, and overall lifestyle, and he insisted that she call him coach from now on. When Ju-eun tried to formalize things with a contract, he shredded it and declared that it was his rules or nothing. Meanwhile, the resident spy Woo-shik used his connections to dig up dirt on Kim-jon. He discovered that this mysterious man was, in fact, the same guy who always hovered around Ju-eun like a clingy ex. Woo-shik, of course, was left thoroughly baffled by what was going on. The next day, Young-ho decided it was time to whip Ju-eun into shape and took her for a full-body analysis. Ju-eun was mortified at the thought of these people examining every ounce of her body fat and muscle tone. It seemed like there would be no secrets left between her and Young-ho. Meanwhile, in the family dinner at Grandma's house, where the guest list included Young-ho's stepbrother, Kim Young-jun, This guy was his dad's son from a second marriage. Now she was actually the Young-ho's maternal grandmother, according to Grandma's ironclad rules. He had no real claim to the family company. Grandma was clearly the boss of bosses, and step relations didn't stand a chance in her world. The next day, the three musketeers, Young-ho, Jun-sung, and Ji-won, decided to raid Ju-eun's house the next morning. They rummaged through her kitchen, bathroom, and cupboards like customs officers on a mission. And they find a treasure trove of junk food that they promptly declared poison for her thyroid condition. They scolded her for her failed dieting attempts, which they claimed were doomed thanks to her stash of snacks. To fix things, they replaced her fridge contents with healthy food and gave her strict medication orders. Young-ho also noticed that Ju-eun had kept 2 old bandages he'd used on her. Clearly, the girl had a sentimental streak. To wrap things up, Young-ho casually remarked that he preferred to keep a low profile, because obviously he doesn't want anyone to know that he is Kim Jong. Young-ho informed Ju-eun that he wouldn't keep stepping out every time to train her. Instead, she would have to come to his luxurious home, which, as expected, was straight out of a rich kid fantasy. When she asked if that was his actual house, Young-ho, with a smug expression, declared that she wouldn't believe it, but he was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. Not only that, but he was also the sole heir to his company. Of course, he added that he had never really lived in that house, which made his whole bragging session even funnier. As for Ju-eun, she clearly didn't buy a word of it. Then came the much-awaited training, and as expected, Ju-eun was thoroughly embarrassed. Young-ho, being annoyingly attentive, seemed to be everywhere, correcting her posture, stopping her from eating junk food, and even reminding her about her medicines. She couldn't escape him, not at home, not at work, and definitely not in her dreams, where he was probably lurking like a fitness-obsessed ghost. One night, Young-ho decided to drop Ju-eun home, which sounded innocent enough, except as soon as she entered her house, her creepy neighbor popped out of nowhere. This guy, who had clearly been stalking her for a while, decided that breaking into her house was a great idea. Luckily, Young-ho, being tailing her, caught the guy red-handed. Young-ho barged into the house, thrashed the stalker, and ensured Ju-eun's safety. The scene quickly shifted to the police station, where the stalker, despite being caught in the act, confidently claimed he was just there to greet his neighbor. To make things worse, the police seemed skeptical that such a handsome guy would stalk someone like Ju-eun, all because of her weight. Clearly, even the cops weren't immune to toxic beauty standards. Young-ho, on the other hand, couldn't believe Ju-eun, a trained attorney, didn't stand up for herself. She explained that the law didn't protect her the way it should. Young-ho decided it wasn't safe for Ju-eun to stay at her house, especially since her lock was broken. Ju-eun, determined to avoid more embarrassment, lied that she'd stay at her best friend's place. She even pointed out a random location, claiming her friend lived there, but instead, she snuck off to a cheap hotel, thinking she had outsmarted him. Of course, Young-ho wasn't born yesterday. He caught her red hand and scolded her for choosing such a shady place to stay. She, now thoroughly embarrassed, tried to explain that her best friend's mom was visiting and that she didn't feel like going home. She also threw in a mention of her creepy neighbor for good measure. Young-ho, the knight in shining armor, insisted she stay at his place instead. He even handed her a blanket and pillow, which made Ju-eun ask where he planned to sleep. He sarcastically replied that she wasn't special enough for him to give up his bed, but he had actually given up his bed for her. Classic tsundere behavior. The next morning, thanks to his over-the-top workout regime, poor Ju-eun's legs were so stiff that the other 2 boys had to help straighten them out. After this hilarious ordeal, they all sat down for breakfast. During the meal, Ju-eun showed them an old photo of herself back when she was slim and fit. Naturally, no one believed it was her, which only added to her annoyance. Meanwhile, Young-ho announced he was leaving for a few days. Turns out, during the fight with the stalker, he had aggravated an old knee injury from a childhood accident. He needed to go to another city for treatment. While Young-ho was off dealing with his injuries, Woo-shuk also found out about the stalker who was following Ju-eun. He then went to that stalker and started beating him up. He warned him not to dare to come near Ju-eun again. Meanwhile, Soo-jin was in a deep depression. Although she had taken Woo-shik away from Ju-eun, she hadn't been able to reach his heart the way Ju-eun had. Amidst all this training, Ju-eun was making significant progress with her weight loss. Young-ho took her for another type of training, which was self-defense. He explained to her that just as the stalker had attacked her before, she needed to learn how to protect herself. He then started training her. However, during the session, they accidentally ended up sharing a kiss. During training, Young often came very close to her, which embarrassed Ju-eun a lot. However, Young remained confident and always told her that since she had entrusted her body to him, she should stay committed to the process. But after reaching home, Young kept recalling the kiss repeatedly. On the other hand, Ju-eun was experiencing the same situation. Later, for his final medical analysis, Young left with manager Min to another city, where he was going to stay out of town for several days. Jun assumed that he had gone to the USA to meet his girlfriend, with whom he had a rumored relationship. He frequently video called her and closely monitored her training. He even instructed her to record and send videos of every step of her training. He was extremely strict and professional in his work, which was why he had earned such a high reputation in physical training. However, Young-ho didn't tell Ju-eun the real reason for his trip, that he had actually gone for his medical treatment. There, the doctor informed him that his knee had healed, but he still felt pain. The doctor explained that this meant he was facing a psychological issue, that the pain wasn't real, but rather a result of his mind, stemming from the trauma he had suffered in childhood. Young-ho reflected that his life had never had any sweetness, and it had always been bitter. He feared that he would have to endure this pain for the rest of his life since it was psychological and had no real cure for him. Finally, after many days, the time for his return arrived. As soon as he entered his training room, June was about to fall, but he caught her in time. He saw that her face had completely transformed, and even her dimples had returned. Seeing Young-ho staring at her, she asked him if he wanted to cast an evil eye on her dimples by his look. She reminded him that she had always looked like this, beautiful and pretty. Initially, Young-ho complimented her, but then he casually remarked that her stomach and hips were still fat, since weight loss always starts from the top and takes longer to show results in the lower body. But Ju-eun wasn't paying attention at all because she was feeling extremely jealous. She suspected that Young-ho had spent time with his girlfriend. To make him jealous in return, Ju-eun said that she was very tired after her workout and was going for a massage, specifically from a male masseur. Just imagining this made Young-ho feel insecure. He immediately insisted that he would do the massage himself and made her sit on a massage chair. While massaging her, he reminded her not to forget that she had entrusted her body to him. Finally, the day arrived when they checked Ju-eun's weight, and she had reached 62 kilograms. She had previously placed a bet with everyone that when she reached this weight, they would have to give her a special day where they would live their lives just like her. Young protested loudly and resisted the idea, but what could he do? The other two had already agreed, so he had no choice but to agree as well. She declared that it was a cheat day, and they would eat as much as they wanted. First, she made them drink coffee. She even told all three of them through a video call that there would be no exercise that day and instructed everyone not to touch any machines. She then made them watch a romantic movie and later told them to rest for a while and sleep without worrying about time. For dinner, she instructed them to get fully ready and meet her at the designated spot for her celebration. Despite their reluctance, Young-ho eventually arrived with his friends. She ordered a large amount of unhealthy food, something Young hadn't eaten in years, and forcefully made him eat it. She wanted him to experience the real joy of life in some way. They even took selfies together. On the other hand, Woo Shik had gotten into trouble. The same stalker had filed a case against him, accusing him of physical assault and threats. The case had been exaggerated significantly. Woo Shik didn't have an attorney, but just then, Soo-jin arrived. Shortly after, she also called Ju-eun there. Ju-eun felt extremely embarrassed and didn't want to face the stalker. She was upset with Woo Shik for what he had done. To make matters worse, the stalker had even arranged for witnesses, and he even made sure that Young-ho would also come to the police station. Seeing the situation, Ju-eun angrily told Woo Shik that he didn't need to care for her anymore and he should focus only on his girlfriend now. When Soo-jin saw all of this, it deeply hurt her. But what could she do? She had done everything she could, yet she still couldn't win against Ju-eun. Only an hour remained before the cheat day, so Ju-eun said that she wanted to drink the last coffee on her cheat day. She asked Young-ho to stop the car, and then she went inside to get coffee, and even brought one for Young-ho as well. Handing it to him, she expressed that she wanted him to taste the sweetness of life. Since it was raining, she went outside to stand in the open air. Shortly after, Young-ho also followed her out, took a sip of the sweet coffee, and admitted that he also wanted to taste sweetness in life. He kept gazing at her dimples as if he was getting lost in them. Embarrassed, she told him not to look at her like that. At that moment, he created an incredibly romantic scene. He opened his umbrella and reminded her that she had willingly given him the right over her body. Without hesitation, he kissed her. After this kiss, Ju-eun became so flustered that she couldn't even make eye contact with Young. She quickly took his jacket and covered her face with it throughout the journey back. Even the next day, she avoided facing him. However, the next morning, she dressed up specially, wanting to look good. But due to her overreaction and embarrassment from the previous day, Young-ho acted as if nothing had happened. He completely switched into his coach mode and focused on her training. He made her do a lot of exercises, but later in the day, things took a turn for the worse for Ju-eun because of one case. Her childhood memories started resurfacing in his mind. His father had passed away due to an occupational injury, but instead of expressing any sorrow, the company's owner had merely thrown some compensation money at his family, and they never apologized for the negligence. That day, a similar case came to Ju-hoon. However, instead of keeping it to herself, she went and told Soo-jin that not only had she transformed physically, but it also seemed like she was no longer the same person who used to be her friend. Because Soo-jin was not taking this case seriously, she remarked that she was becoming cruel and stone-hearted. Meanwhile, Young-ho finally gathered the courage to visit his grandmother and was able to convince her. Seeing him, she became very emotional, forgave him, and embraced him. However, she made a request, and she asked him to return to the family business and take responsibility for it. Even though Young had become very strong and mature over time, deep inside, he was still the same wounded child who had been weak since childhood. On the other hand, Ju-eun did something unexpected that day. A terrible smell was coming from her bag, causing everyone around her to cover their noses. As it turned out, there was a rotten orange in her bag, which she had placed there a year ago and forgotten about. This was the reason the whole house smelled awful. She felt extremely embarrassed, but while everyone was bothered by the smell, the only thing on Ju-eun's mind was that, did Young really kiss me yesterday and forget about it? Despite that, Young-ho was acting as if nothing had happened. Was this supposed to be normal? Ju-eun couldn't stop thinking about it, but Young-ho, on the other hand, was preoccupied with his own tensions. After much contemplation, he finally made a decision that he was going to fulfill his grandmother's dream by taking over his mother's company. After making this difficult choice, he returned and openly told Ji-eun that he had not forgotten about their kiss, and yes, he had meant it. Along with this, he gifted her a new bag since her old one had already become useless due to the bad odor. Jealous Ji-eun then sarcastically remarked that since he had spent so much time in the USA, kissing must be as casual for him as saying hello or hi. She further taunted him by mentioning that he had a girlfriend. However, Young-ho clarified that there was nothing between him and that celebrity because she had never been his girlfriend, just a friend. Later that day, both of them ended up spending time with a boy named Ji. Ji was actually the son of Ju-eun's best friend, and due to an emergency, she had left the baby in their care. They spent the next days babysitting him and had a lot of fun together. However, one day, Young-ho felt a bit sad because, due to babysitting, Ju-eun was going to spend the night with the boy instead of coming home. Feeling disappointed, he started texting her, and they ended up chatting for a long time. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jeong and Woo-shik were seen making secret plans. They were plotting ways to break the shareholders' trust so that Young-ho could be removed from the company's control. The next day, when Ju-eun arrived at the office, she was informed about a confidential meeting. She was given an address and asked to go there. However, upon reaching the location, she was shocked to learn that the legal advice being provided on behalf of a major company was actually coming from none other than Young-ho himself. This fact had been deliberately kept hidden from her. Seeing all this, she was left completely shocked. She couldn't handle the situation and ran away from there. Young-ho followed her and tried to convince her, but she told him that it felt as if he had deliberately hidden the truth from her and made her feel betrayed. However, Young-ho forcefully took her into the elevator, and as they kept going up and down, he explained everything to her. He reminded her that he had hinted at it before, but Ju-eun was still in shock. She felt that their worlds were completely different, and that she could never truly match him in any way. But Young-ho didn't care about any of this. However, there was a third person who was burning with jealousy, and that was Soo-jin. When she saw all this, she was completely stunned to see that even though she had taken Woo-shik away, Ju-eun had ended up with someone even more handsome and wealthy. This realization made her extremely envious, because she didn't want to see Ju-eun happy in any situation. Finally, the meeting ended, and Young-ho wanted to talk to Ju-eun, but she avoided him and quickly left. In reality, she had planned to visit her hometown to meet her mother that day. Young-ho first went to her house and waited for a long time, but when she didn't return, he called Jun-sung and found out that she had gone to Daegu. Upon learning this, he decided to go to Daegu as well. Actually, Ju-eun's family had recently started a new business. Her mother and brother had opened a restaurant, and its grand opening was taking place on that day. There was a lot of work to do, and Ju-eun helped them as well. However, after finishing her work, she quickly went home. The rest of the family had not yet returned. There, she had dinner, which her mother had prepared, and then sat alone, lost in thought. The shock of everything that had happened was overwhelming for her. For some reason, thinking about it brought tears to her eyes. She wondered if she was going crazy. Just then, she received a message from Young-ho. He told her that he had arrived in Daegu and was at the beach. He asked his Daegu Venus to come there because he is waiting for her. Upon hearing this, she immediately ran outside. She was in such a hurry that she forgot to take her car keys and had to take a taxi instead. When she reached the beach, she saw Young-ho standing there in the freezing cold. He opened his arms, and without hesitation, she ran straight to him and hugged him. Both of them apologized to each other for overreacting. Young-ho admitted that he had scolded her a bit too much, and she admitted that she had taken things too emotionally. After that, they held hands and began walking back home together. Young-ho recalled how his childhood had been full of trauma, and he told everything to Ju-un. There had been an accident that left him crippled, and to make matters worse, he had lost his mother. Even though years had passed, he still hadn't fully recovered from the pain. The doctors kept insisting that he was fine, but honestly, it didn't feel that way to him. And now, thanks to his grandmother's relentless pressure, he had no choice but to take over the family business. After telling everything, he dropped her home, but just as he was about to go inside, Ju-un turned around and casually mentioned that her mother was not staying in the house that night. She then suggested that if he wanted, he could come over and sleep next to her, adding that she just wanted to hold his hand while she slept. Fast forward to the room. They were lying in the same bed. Young-ho couldn't help but tease her, pointing out that she had willingly entrusted her body to him, so why was she trembling now? She, of course, denied being nervous at all and reassured him that she completely trusted him. And just like that, she let out a deep breath and dozed off. Amused, Young chuckled and muttered something, and he left the lights on, and just in case he suddenly lost control, and that was that. The two of them had fallen asleep. A little while later, Young-ho woke up, saw Ju-un was sleeping peacefully, and he couldn't resist watching her cute face while she slept. But before morning arrived, he quietly slipped away. But before leaving, he left Ju-un's thyroid medicine by her side. Meanwhile, Sujin was practically fuming with rage and jealousy. She couldn't understand how, despite changing herself so much, having all the money she could ever need, and possessing everything one could possibly want, she still wasn't happy. She kept wondering why every good thing always ended up in Ju-un's hands instead of hers. She had snatched Woo-shik away from Ju-un, yet she still didn't feel at peace. On the other hand, Woo-shik had recently discovered something interesting through a reporter. Apparently, there was some kind of connection between Young-ho and John Kim. This raised suspicion, and he thought that Young-ho was actually John Kim. But Woo-shik knew he needed proof before jumping to conclusions. So he set out to investigate. When he shared this theory with Jiang, he could hardly contain his excitement. He immediately declared that if they managed to gather evidence before the board of directors meeting, they could blow everything wide open. Since John Kim had been involved in a scandal with that celebrity who had been linked to a white substance scandal, this could be their golden opportunity to sway the shareholders to their side. Back at home, Ju-un had returned, much to the delight of the three boys, who were overjoyed to see her. Her boyfriend even threw her a secretive little gesture, clearly up to something mischievous. Of course, with so many people around, open displays of romance were out of the question. Evening rolled around, and just as she thought she could relax, Young-ho called her in for a workout session. Desperate to get out of it, she pleaded with him, even attempting a bit of sweet-talking, but he shut her down immediately. Young-ho firmly reminded her that their dating life was one thing, but right now, she was just his client and he was her coach. No amount of persuasion was going to change his mind, and so, June was dragged into an intense workout session, which left her utterly drained. Finally, the big day arrived. Young-ho made his grand entry into the company as a director. He was introduced to everyone, marking his first appearance as a high-ranking executive. His father met him and, with a serious tone, informed him that the director's seat had once belonged to his mother, but now it was his turn to take charge. Finally, peace would come to him. But his father spoke to him like a total robot, and all he did was congratulate Young-ho for this company without even asking how he was doing. After hearing all this, the poor guy slipped into deep trauma. His mom had passed away earlier, and his dad always kept his distance. Adding to that, he was already battling psychological pain. Then one day, Young-ho had an attack, and his legs stopped working. Crawling and dragging himself, he somehow made it to his room. This guy was like a DIY doctor, and he had a whole medical setup at home. He tried treating himself, but the pain was unbearable. Meanwhile, we see Ju-un was returning home, and she gets so excited by the snowfall on the way. She even thinks, wow, this would be so romantic to watch with Young-ho. And when she gets home, she starts calling for him, but he doesn't respond. Then she calls him and finally ends up at his door. Ju-un keeps searching for him and accidentally stumbles into his secret room, and there he was, completely down and out, looking weak and utterly miserable, and he was crying in pain. She wanted to go near him, but he was like, "Nope, no one should see me like this." He pushed her away, and all she could do was stand outside the door and listen to his sobbing and wailing. Ju-yoon felt awful, because she realized that she could only hear him cry without helping him. Later, when Young-ho's pain went away, he finally came out and hugged her. That's when he revealed the whole truth. After hearing another this, Ju-un said, "So, while I thought you were off gallivanting with someone having a grand old time, you were actually in the hospital getting treated?" She was devastated, but Young-ho calmly replied, "See, that's why I always say, things are never as they seem." She felt even worse, but before she could start crying again, Young-ho jumped in with some wisdom. He said, "Look, everyone's life has pain hidden somewhere. No matter how happy they seem, there's always some wound deep inside." And he wasn't wrong. The next day rolled around, and Chuan reminded him about the bet they had made. She had said that if she reduced her weight before the snowfall, they would go camping for 5 days. Well, she hadn't lost the weight, but she still managed to convince the strict John Kim to go camping. After all, she wasn't just his trainee anymore, but she was his girlfriend. And boyfriends have to put up with their girlfriend's quirks. The two were now in a relationship, but it was still under wraps. Even during their workout sessions, their romance kept sneaking in, and they were really enjoying secretly dating. Meanwhile, there was also a girl pursuing Jun Sung. She was a huge celebrity who had worked with him in an ad and ended up falling for him. But Jun Sung kept trying to push her away. However, Lee-jin was convinced that one day she would definitely win his heart. On the other hand, Soo-jin felt super insecure about all this, because for one, Ju-eun was getting everything she had always wanted. Meanwhile, Woo-shik was so tangled up in office politics that he barely had time for her. One day, Woo-shik suddenly remembered that Ju-eun had once given him a tie. She had even said, "The day I propose to you, I'll give you another tie." Realizing this, Woo-shik called Ju-eun and asked to meet her. Ju-eun was at her favorite coffee shop, standing with her boyfriend, when she ran into Woo-shik. Young-ho joked, saying that if she wanted, he could teach the guy a lesson, but only on the condition that she'd fight his case afterward. Of course, he was just kidding, and after teasing them, he left the two of them alone. Woo-shik had something to talk about, so he handed her back the tie she had gifted him. He explained that it wasn't like he wasn't sincere with Soo-jin. He genuinely loved her and wasn't cheating on her, but since he and Ju-eun had been friends for 15 years, he couldn't just stop caring about her so suddenly. He also told her that she was a genuinely good person, which left her with mixed emotions, but she eventually forgives him. Soo-jin had noticed all this, and it felt to her like something was still going on between Woo-shik and Ju-eun. So she stormed off in anger, but at the office, she never missed a chance to put Ju-eun down. A few days later, Ju-eun and the rest of the Three Musketeers go on a camping trip, and Ju-eun also brings along her best friend Yoon. Yoon playfully gives each of them funny nicknames, like calling Ji-woong Mr. Sexy, which instantly turns his face red. Everyone has an amazing time, laughing and enjoying themselves. At the end, they all play a confession game, and to everyone's surprise, Young-ho openly confesses that he is dating Ju-eun. His friends are completely shocked, and even Ju-eun is too stunned to react. She tries to explain things to her friend Yoon, but Yoon confronts Young-ho about a secret she had discovered. Apparently, her bestie had been hiding all this from her. She sat him down and interrogated him, asking what kind of work he really did. Then Young-ho explains that he doesn't really do anything, which Yoon takes as a joke. She wanted to tease him, so she said she would never give her best friend to an unemployed guy. Hearing this, Young-ho gets a little nervous, but Yoon bursts out laughing, revealing she was just teasing him. On their way back, as Young-ho drops Ju-eun off at home, he spots his bodyguard waiting outside. Seeing him coming back so late after a night of fun and camping, the bodyguard sternly reminds Young-ho that he doesn't have the luxury of wasting time on jokes and laughter. He revealed that there was office politics brewing against him, and yet he was busy doing things like this. After hearing this, Young-ho replies that he no longer worries about anything, and he then dramatically announced in front of his bodyguard that he had a confession to make. Holding Ju-eun close, he declared that she was officially his girlfriend and added, with a grin, that since she was already living in his house, there was no need for anyone to make a fuss about it. Ju-eun was embarrassed by this sudden public proclamation, but Young-ho reassured her by saying that there was no need to feel nervous. He told her she might think she was not good enough for him, but to him, she was Miss Perfect. As for Ju-eun, she had already found a new house and was planning to move the very next day. That night was her last night in Young-ho's home, so he suggested that they stay up all night talking in his bed. She initially refused by teasing him about what he might be imagining, but then, not long after, she grabbed her pillow and walked into his room herself. Of course, she set strict ground rules and said that he could only touch her hands and feet, but nothing else. When he asked if dimples were included because he wanted to touch them, she firmly replied, "Not allowed." Resigned to his fate, Young-ho accepted her conditions, though it was clear he was suffering a bit. She then lay down next to him, clinging to the edge of the bed, and they had a heartfelt conversation. She wished him the best for his new journey as a director and for his new start, then bid him good night. The next morning, Young-ho woke up to find that Ju-eun had already left. However, before leaving, she had prepared a lovely breakfast for him, which he appreciated deeply. She had moved into her new apartment, but had kept the bandages Young had once given her as a token of their bond. Meanwhile, the narrative shifted to Young-ho's stepmother, Harin. Harin had served the family faithfully for 20 years and was a kind woman. However, she couldn't help but feel a little insecure. Somewhere deep down, she had started to hope that her son might one day get a share in the company. But she knew she could never replace Young-ho as the rightful heir, which made her feel uneasy. Acting on her insecurity, she suggested that the family should consider moving out of their current house. Since the rightful heir had returned, things had started to shift. Finally, Young-ho arrived at the office for his first day, accompanied by his attorney, Soo-jin. Despite all the chaos, Soo-jin proved to be a consummate professional, setting aside personal issues to handle the situation efficiently. They discovered that some shareholders were being bought out, so they prepared a strategy to ensure Young-ho retained control and became the official head of the company. After spending the entire day at the office, Young-ho decided to visit his grandmother for dinner, but his grandmother had already tricked him. She brought along a girl from a highly prestigious family, intending to arrange her marriage with Young-ho. After introducing them, she left the two alone. However, Young-ho wasted no time and directly told the girl that he wasn't interested in her because he loved someone else. The girl understood his feelings and in turn refused the marriage proposal when speaking to his grandmother. Meanwhile, Jun-sung found himself caught up in a bizarre situation with that celebrity again, who is not backing off. Yi-jin staged a dramatic drowning act, forcing Jun-sung to save her. In the process, she managed to steal a kiss under the pretense of needing CPR. She then had the audacity to declare that now Jun-sung had no choice but to accept her as his girlfriend. On the other hand, Woo Shik had now gathered solid evidence and reliable information suggesting that Young-ho was none other than John Kim. Though it was still just a rumor, the mystery surrounding John Kim's identity was about to unravel. Back at the office, Young-ho was struggling to adjust to his new responsibilities. His brain wasn't used to this kind of work as he was more accustomed to workouts than corporate politics. Still, he made time to meet Ju-eun. Though he couldn't go inside her house due to time constraints, he hugged her from outside and whispered, "I love you," before leaving. After all, his manager's watchful eyes were always on him. The next day was critical because the board of directors was holding a meeting to approve Young-ho's appointment as the company's director. He and his team entered the meeting with great confidence. However, Jiang had already swayed several key shareholders to his side, and many major players were conveniently absent from the meeting. As a result, no decision could be made, leaving Young-ho and his team in a tight spot. Meanwhile, Ju-eun was at home, getting ready for the day in a sleek and beautiful dress she had never been able to fit into before. With some glamorous makeup, she admired her transformation in the mirror. She felt proud of the changes John Kim had helped her achieve. But her celebration was cut short when shocking news broke on social media. John Kim was actually Young-ho, and he refrained from becoming the company's director. However, his character was being called into question due to his rumored association with white substances, whose reputation had been tarnished by the scandal. Ju-eun became anxious, unable to reach Young-ho. Soon she found him standing outside her door as reporters were camped outside his house and hotel suite. Her home was the only safe haven he could find. Despite feeling her house was too modest for someone like him, she welcomed him with an open heart, saying, "It may not match your world, but it's yours if you need it." Meanwhile, Young-ho's grandmother was worried about the scandal and his choice of a girlfriend who was also his own attorney. She wanted him to marry someone who could strengthen his position in the company, as there were many plotting against him. Poor Young-ho, however, was overwhelmed by depression and his psychological pain started to resurface, leaving him in a vulnerable state amidst all the chaos. As soon as Young-ho began to feel pain, he sent Ju-eun out of the room. He never let her see him during his vulnerable moments. Interestingly, Young-ho had met his friend Jun-sung during a similar low point when he was injured and in terrible shape. Jun Sung, who couldn't bear to see anyone weak or helpless, had initially thought Young-ho pitied him, but he generously helped him, and since that day they have become best friends. And one day, while Ju Sung was exhausted from his workout, Yi-jin casually lay down next to him, teasing, "Wow, this relationship is moving fast. We kissed the other day, and now we're practically sleeping together." Her antics were childish, but Jun Sung found her strangely endearing. Meanwhile, the three boys showed up at Ju-won's small house. Used to morning workouts, they were disappointed to find no equipment in her house. But Ju-won decided to put them through a Korean auntie workout. She dragged them to the park and made them mimic the peculiar exercises often performed by elderly ladies. To save their reputations, she had then covered their faces with scarves. The exercises had no logic whatsoever, but John Kim didn't mind, as it was fun because his girlfriend was leading the session. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Young-ho returned to his family home. Kneeling before his father, he attempted to show respect, but his father stopped him, saying, "Don't kneel, you'll hurt your knees." His father knew everything Young-ho had been through, but never openly acknowledged it. His grandmother, on the other hand, was so upset with him that she refused to meet him. As for Jun Sung, he had his own tragic story. Born in prison, he was adopted by someone else after his mother was imprisoned for accidentally killing someone in self-defense. Though she was innocent, his mother had distanced herself from him, not wanting to burden him with her criminal past. But Jun Sung, who longing to meet his mother, sought Ju-eun's help to convince his mother. In the meantime, the same little boy who had nowhere else to go after giving his caretaker a day off ended up at Ju-eun's house. And when she sees it on the video call, she feels very happy that both boys are spending time together so well. Moreover, Young-ho even made that small, chubby kid do quite a bit of physical exercise. Because of this, the child got exhausted and fell asleep. When Ju-eun returned home in the evening, she informed Young-ho that they had managed to handle several issues. She assured him that the statement of that foreign celebrity had helped suppress the scandal, and they were getting shareholders under control. Feeling happy with all this, Young-ho tries to kiss her or get close to her, but Ju-eun tells him to stay away because there's a child in the house and they shouldn't do anything inappropriate. But then something completely threw her off track. Young-ho emerged from the shower, muscular and dripping with water, and Ju-eun could only stare at him. Flustered, she stammered, "Never mind the statement, I'll just take it back." Young-ho kisses her and the two start getting closer, but suddenly an emergency arises. The next day was the board of directors meeting, and on the same day, Young-ho was supposed to be appointed as the company's director. It was also the company's 60th anniversary. Everyone had arrived, but Young-ho was nowhere to be seen. Even the manager couldn't reach him. Ju-eun kept calling him repeatedly, but he didn't pick up. That's when she realized that Young-ho must be going through that same pain again, which is why he hadn't shown up. Searching for him, she finally found him in a corner of the hotel, and his condition was absolutely terrible. Young-ho's leg was in excruciating pain, and he could barely walk. Ju-eun became his pillar of strength, encouraging him. "Look at me. I was once a lost cause, but I transformed myself. You can do it too. You're your grandmother's last hope. If you don't show up, everything will fall apart. You have to fight." Her words somehow convinced him, and Young-ho managed to stand on his feet and attend the ceremony. There, he confidently announced, "I am the new director of the company." Seeing him strong and healthy filled many supporters with joy, but of course, his enemies were present too. Jiang was furious at this turn of events and immediately called his sister to plot their next move. So, the uncle was basically ranting about how young Jun was totally useless now, wondering what exactly he could achieve in life. Of course, Jun overheard this gem of a motivational speech. He was just a poor little kid, and his uncle had already messed up his head quite a bit, so naturally he felt even more hopeless. Ju-eun, who had been running around all day in heels, was sitting alone nursing her sore feet, and Young-ho, the hero of the hour, dismissed his entire entourage just to come and give her some solid foot care advice. After a brief lecture on foot care, he handed her over to Jun Sung and Ji-woong and left for some super important work. When they dropped her off at her apartment, her mom was there, unannounced of course. She was initially shocked to see two random guys at her daughter's home, but when she found out they were her exercise buddies, she turned into the happiest mom ever. They all had a lovely dinner cooked by her mom, who packed some food for later because, the next morning, when Young-ho saw the dish at breakfast, he took a sigh. Jun-sung and Ji-woong think that he won't eat this heavy breakfast, but Young-ho starts eating because it was sent by his future mother-in-law. After this, Young-ho went to the office and exposed some serious errors at work, stuff that could have been a disaster for the company. But poor Jiang had to accept the corrections, even though it clearly hurt his soul. One fine day, Ju-eun, feeling all chill in her office. Just then, she saw that Young-ho had also arrived at her office. She quickly tried to sit down, but before she could, Young-ho suddenly took her up. Everyone in the office was watching them, trying to understand what was happening. Ju-eun felt extremely embarrassed and thought that she was about to have an amazing date, but Young-ho dragged her off for a physical examination instead. Turns out, she had made major progress, with lower body fat, better posture, and controlled thyroid levels, and everything was perfect. Naturally, she was over the moon. To celebrate, Young-ho treated her to some cheat day ice cream. Meanwhile, her grandma decided to thank Heron for her years of service, but didn't hold back on throwing shade at her selfish brother, who was so self-centered that he probably thought the universe revolves around him. Grandmother gives Heron a lot of money and compensation, telling her that she is no longer needed there, and asks her to leave. Heron is shocked to hear this. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ju-eun and everyone else were busy with the Christmas Eve celebration, and they were also preparing for a birthday, as the very next day was Young-ho's birthday. On the other hand, Jun's mom finally called because she wanted to meet him, which had Jun-sung bouncing off the walls in excitement. Young-ho even offered his BMW for the occasion. But then, chaos struck in the hospital, because Heron's son, Young-jun, in the middle of an existential crisis, tried something drastic. But somehow, Jung manages to rescue Young-jun and takes him to the hospital. His condition was very serious, but seeing his nephew in such a state, Jung tells his sister that as long as he's around, he won't let anything happen to his nephew. However, for that, he will need to remove Young-ho from the picture, and only then will his nephew get what he deserves. He orders his men to get Young-ho out of the way. But, thankfully, the ultimate spy, Young-ho's manager, overheard everything and informed Young-ho about this plot. When Young-ho heard this, he panicked about Jun-sung. Because Jun-sung was the one who was driving his car to meet his mother, Young-ho sped off to follow Jun-sung, and then there was Heron also running after her brother because he never wanted to hurt Young-ho. Amidst all the confusion and speeding, Young-ho somehow manages to save Jun-sung. And to help save him, Heron also brings her car in front of them. Both of them get injured, but Young-ho is hurt the most. Seeing him in such a condition, Jun-sung starts crying uncontrollably. But somehow they manage to get the bleeding Young-ho to the hospital. While everyone freaked out, Ju-eun was blissfully unaware, probably wondering why no one was picking up her calls. Finally, the doctor revealed that Young-ho had survived. However, it was revealed that he now had multiple fractures and severely injured the same leg again. Amid all this, when Ju-eun doesn't find out anything, she directly goes to Soo-jin and starts asking for help. She yells at her, speaking like a friend, and says, "Why have you changed? Why have you become like this?" At that moment, Soo-jin decided to vent all her pent-up frustrations, recounting years of mistreatment she had endured during university. This led to an emotional apology, and just like that, the two girls reconciled and became friends again. After this, Ju-eun knew that Young-ho might be going through some emotional turmoil and insisted she be taken to him immediately. Jun-sung tried to delay her, but she was persistent. Apparently, Young-ho had given strict instructions not to let her see him, which only made her cry and scream more. In the midst of all this, Young-ho sent her a message that simply said, "2 taps." This turned out to be a secret training code he had taught her, meaning she should leave him alone, but instead of complying, she stood outside his door and said, she knows that Young-ho doesn't want to meet her because he fears she'll start crying when she sees him, but Ju-eun tells him that no matter how long it takes for Young-ho to recover, she will always be with him and will never leave his side. Hearing all this, Young-ho feels deeply hurt, but he still says nothing because he doesn't want Ju-eun to go through any more problems because of him. Ju-eun finally tells Young-ho that he will always be her Mr. Sexy Muscular coach, and respecting his decision, she doesn't insist any further and leaves. Grandmother also thanks Heron for saving her grandson's life. Meanwhile, Soo-jin and Woo-shik also resolved their misunderstandings and accepted each other as a couple. Time kept passing and a year had already gone by, bringing the arrival of another Christmas. However, Ju-eun's life had become quite lonely. Everywhere she looked, she seemed to see Young-ho standing before him with open arms, but those were merely hallucinations. But one day, as Ju-eun is walking, she feels like she's dreaming again. But only this time, Young-ho is actually standing right in front of her and she bumps into him. Young-ho taps his feet, showing that he is fully recovered, and with that, the story shifts into a flashback. His recovery had been extremely painful. The same suffering he had endured before was repeating itself. In childhood, it had not been an accident but a rare disease that had caused his leg to malfunction. During the entire period of his treatment, he had deeply missed his mother. To pass the time, he had also been knitting a scarf for her, unaware that she had already passed away. His family had kept this a secret from him to prevent him from going into shock. One day, when he had stepped out of his hospital room, he had noticed a bandage attached above his door. His manager had informed him that Ju-won had left it for him. Considering it a keepsake from Ju-won, he had picked it up, believing it to bring him luck. Eventually, he set off for the USA for his treatment. At the airport, history had seemed to be repeating itself. After years, he had endured a lot, but had remained a fighter, refusing to give up then or now. No matter what, he had to return to Jeong. Meanwhile, Jeo-sung had visited him once to congratulate him after winning the championship. Finally, the day had arrived when his manager had gone to the airport to receive him. Seeing him, he had been utterly shocked because Young-ho had stood on his own feet and walked towards them. When he met Ju-won, he put the same scarf around her neck that he had knitted for her. She was surprised to see him, but soon she received a call from her office. Before the Christmas holidays, she had been under immense workload and had to submit something. However, she held his hand the entire time, unwilling to let him go or lose him again. Finally, after completing her work, she embraced him tightly and wept uncontrollably. But before they could share their sorrows and happiness, his manager called him and said that Young-ho had to go meet his family. And from that, as he walked toward his grandmother, her happiness was evident. Even his father's eyes shone brightly because his son had been granted a new life once again. Everyone sat together to have a meal, and during the conversation, Young-ho's father asked him about his psychological pain. At that moment, Young-ho realized that his father had always been aware of all his illnesses and sufferings, but had never shown it openly. Soon, Christmas arrived, coinciding with Young-ho's birthday. Everyone gathered to celebrate, and even the manager, who was usually serious, appeared in a different mood that day. To mark the occasion, he even sang a song for Young-ho. However, his singing was so off-tune that no one could control their laughter. Meanwhile, Woo-shik proposed to Soo-jin, and they both seemed extremely happy. This Christmas felt much better than before. The day passed with warmth and joy, and eventually, Ju-won and Young-ho found some time alone. They shared all their happiness and sorrows and then spent some quality time together. The next morning, they watched a movie together. At one point, Young-ho told Ju-won that he wanted to test something. She assumed it had a romantic implication. But soon, it became clear that he was actually making her do some physical exercises to check whether her stamina had decreased. After a rigorous workout session, Young-ho wanted to spend more time with his girlfriend. However, just then, Ju-won received a call from her mother, who had recently arrived in Seoul. She asked her daughter why she was getting older without getting married. A year had passed, and she hadn't even been introduced to her boyfriend. She sarcastically remarked that it seemed like he wasn't worthy enough to be introduced. Ju-won found the situation quite frustrating. After that, both Ji-woong and Jun-sung also come to Jun's house and spend a good time with her mother. That same evening, Jun brings Young-ho along to meet her mother. Young-ho is extremely nervous because he was worried that her mother might not like him, but when she sees him, she only asks one thing, whether he will keep her daughter happy. Young-ho answers sincerely, and hearing his response, her mother becomes very happy. Meanwhile, Soo-jin was feeling unwell, and at one point, she visited the hospital's maternity ward. Woo-shik happened to see her there and, in his mind, began to wonder if there was some good news for their family. The thought excited him immensely. Woo-shik immediately rushed to Soo-jin with a gift, which turned out to be baby shoes. Seeing this, she became furious and told him that she was not pregnant and, in fact, could not conceive due to a medical condition that made pregnancy extremely difficult for her. The doctor had also confirmed this. Enraged, she scolded Woo-shik, yelled at him, and eventually found an excuse to send him out of the house. On the other hand, Young-ho had told Ju-won that he was taking her somewhere far away the next day. She immediately got ready and even packed a suitcase. Seeing this, he laughed and told her they weren't going that far. As he checked her suitcase, he found several revealing nightdresses. Amused, he told her not to think too far ahead. In reality, he was taking her to his mother's memorial. While there, Ju-eun received a message from the chairman, who introduced herself as Young-ho's grandmother and expressed her desire to meet her. The two spent the rest of the night together, enjoying their date and having fun. Seeing so many couples around them, Ju-eun jokingly remarked that she had been with Young-ho for so long, yet her finger still felt lonely. She suggested that he buy her a ring, but since he didn't respond, she decided to get one for herself. However, Young-ho suddenly unwrapped a small woolen ball from the scarf he had knitted for her, revealing a beautiful ring hidden inside. He then proposed to her, saying that while he couldn't promise to live and die together, he would never let her get hurt. Young-eun happily accepted his proposal. After returning to Seoul, Young-eun visited her friend Yoon, proudly showing off her engagement ring. She then shared her nervousness about meeting Young-ho's grandmother, who was a highly influential and powerful woman, as the chairman of a major company. Just the thought of meeting her made Ju-yoon anxious. Young helped train her for the meeting and even selected a dress for her, though it was a bit old-fashioned. When Ju-yoon commented that it looked outdated, Young jokingly replied that, considering how strict and old-fashioned Young-ho's grandmother was, even this dress would seem modern to her. Finally, the next day, Ju-yoon met Young-ho's grandmother. Ju-yoon met Young-ho's grandmother. After observing her, the elderly woman picked up her bag. Before grandmother can say anything, Ju-yoon quickly tells her that she won't accept any checks because she truly loves Young-ho. Grandmother chuckles and says, "You must watch too many dramas. I was just taking out my handkerchief." She then reassures Ju-yoon and states that, apart from Ju-yoon's dress, she liked everything else about her, and this was because grandmother had already observed Ju-yoon's behavior at the hospital that day and had decided that she was perfect for Young-ho. However, instead of saying it outright, she places a condition before Ju-yoon. Hearing this, Ju-yoon becomes extremely worried. When she reaches home and tries to seduce Young-ho, he finally asks what's really going on in her mind. Ju-yoon then revealed something surprising. She told him that our grandmother had demanded a grandson as part of the marriage arrangement, and she became determined to fulfill this wish as soon as possible. However, Young-ho had no intention of rushing into this. Every time she hinted at it, he distracted her by making her do intense workouts and setting physical challenges for her. Despite completing all the targets he set, he still refused to listen to her, leaving her both frustrated and amused. One day, a family meeting was held at Young-ho's house. When Ju-yoon arrived at Young-ho's house, she was dressed in traditional attire, but it seemed a bit over the top. But the house felt very quiet because no one was talking much in this house. So, Ju-yoon gathers everyone in the living room. To impress them, she recites a poem with a dance. But in reality, what she's actually saying is, if the Grim Reaper comes for me at 60, I'll just tell him, I can't go yet because I'm still sexy. Seeing this, Young-ho's grandmother burst into laughter, and for the first time the family witnessed her laughing so heartily, the gathering turned out to be filled with joy and fun. Even Young-ho's father, who was usually serious, was seen smiling that day. Everyone was extremely happy, and Young-ho took Ju-yoon to his room. Finally, he confesses everything to her. During the conversation, Young-ho expressed his concerns about potential genetic risks that could affect their family. However, Ju-yoon reassured him, saying that they couldn't stop living just because of possible risks. She encouraged him to think positively and focus on the good things in life. With her words, she managed to remove his fears and confidently declared that they would remain healthy and have children in the future. Amidst all this, another secret came to light that Young-ho's father was suffering from cancer. Upon learning this, Young-ho immediately stepped forward to take care of him. His father was deeply touched to see him so concerned and caring. That day, Young-ho also met his younger stepbrother and had a heartfelt conversation with him. It was an emotional moment, as he finally embraced his role as an elder brother and strengthened his bond with his family. Meanwhile, Woo-shik explains to Soo-jin that her illness is not incurable and assures her that he will get her treated by the best doctors. He also promises that they will get married soon. Hearing this, Soo-jin apologizes for the past, and the two reunite. Finally, the wedding preparations begin. During the photo shoot, instead of wearing a traditional white dress, Ju-yoon chose a red one, obviously because she wanted to stand out. Everyone enjoys the celebration to the fullest. A year passes after their wedding, and during this time, Young-ho has to leave for a business trip. When he returns, Ju-yoon comes to pick him up. But the moment Young-ho sees her, he is completely shocked, because what in the world had happened to his wife? Ju-yoon had become chubby again. Panic sets in as he wonders if her thyroid levels have shot up or if all his hard work has gone to waste. But before he can spiral further, Ju-yoon quickly reassures him that she's not alone in this. Along with her, twins are also feeling hungry. That's when she reveals that she's pregnant. Hearing this, not just Young-ho, but also Jun-sung and Ji-woong are overjoyed. As Young-ho stares at her dimples, Ju-yoon tells him not to worry because she'll transform herself again, and her dimples will be back. Young-ho smiles, but deep down he's just thinking, how on earth am I going to turn this girl back into Daegu's Venus again? And with that, this adorable, chubby love story comes to an end.